As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.
For the first time since the Korean War ended in 1953, North Korea is acquiring combat experiences. North Korea has sent some small number of contingents to Vietnam and some other countries in the past, but this is really the first time that North Korea experiences this large-scale war, especially the modern warfare, witnessing the use of advanced weaponry like drones. And so those North Korean soldiers who survive and go back to North Korea could contribute to North Korea's modern warfare preparations.
Aloha, and welcome to Dialogue, where conversations shape security. I'm your host, James Minnich, Colonel United States Army retired and professor here at the Daniel K. Inouye Asia-Pacific Center for Security Studies in Honolulu, Hawaii. It's a pleasure to have you with us for Dialogue 32, Seoul between Moscow and Pyongyang. The world is watching with bated breath as the conflict in Ukraine continues to unfold. And now a new development has emerged that adds another layer of complexity to this already volatile situation. North Korea's deployment of troops to Russia. North Korea's unprecedented deployment of over 10,000 troops, primarily elite forces, to Russia has thrust Seoul into a geographical quagmire. Caught between its alliance with the United States and the burgeoning Moscow-Pyongyang partnership, South Korea must navigate a complex landscape, fraught with risk and uncertainty. The stakes are incredibly high, beyond the immediate concern of Korean troops gaining combat experience, including the use of advanced military technologies like drones and electronic warfare systems. There's the looming threat of Russia providing North Korea with game-changing military technology. This could include advancements in nuclear warheads, missile systems, surveillance capabilities, and advanced submarine technologies, significantly altering the regional balance of power. Furthermore, this situation has the potential to reshape global alliances, with a possible axis forming between Moscow, Pyongyang, and Beijing. This alignment could undermine sanctions on North Korea, fuel its military ambitions, and complicate Seoul's strategic calculus. At the heart of this issue lies the question of Seoul's objectives and strategies. What does South Korea seek to achieve in the face of these developments, and how can it leverage its considerable defense industry, diplomatic relationships, and alliances with the United States to advance its goals? The urgency for clear, coordinated, and phased responses has never been greater. The situation also underscores the importance of lawfare and informational warfare. By utilizing international legal mechanisms and shaping global narratives, South Korea can strengthen its position and rally support among its allies. These tools will be essential in countering North Korea's actions, exposing the risks of its involvement in Ukraine, and deterring future escalatory moves by Moscow or Pyongyang. Today we have the privilege of exploring these complex issues with Dr. Lami Kim, DKI APCSS professor, specializing in nuclear non-proliferation and Northeast Asia security. Lami, so glad to have you back on the program.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, some of our viewers will remember that it was a year ago that you were here with us on episode 5 talking about nuclear Indo-Pacific. A year's gone by. I wonder, you did last time, but again, maybe this time. Tell us a little bit about your story. How did you come to this point in life?
Yeah, so I'm a professor at APCSS. I joined the center last year, about a year and a half ago. Before that, I taught at the U.S. Army War College. Before that, at the University of Hong Kong. I'm originally from South Korea. I served as a South Korean diplomat long time ago, but I pursued PhD in international relations. I specialize in nuclear proliferation and other issues in the Northeast Asia.
Wonderful. Well, let's just jump into it then. Let's maybe start with a little bit of an update on the Ukraine war. Without a doubt, the Ukraine war, I mean, it's escalating in both in intensity and geographical scope. And as I mentioned in the opening, I mean, North Korea is now reportedly sending troops to Russia. Of course, there's even been reports this weekend about some potential significant casualties of North Koreans. And so maybe you might even talk a little bit about this. And so with that, just give us an update and let us know about what those developments have been.
Yeah, sure. So the ties between North Korea and Russia have been strengthening over the past years, especially since the outbreak of the Ukraine war. So since August 2023, North Korea has been providing Russia with weapons. Reports say that Russia has sent over 13,000 containers filled with weapons, including ammunition, missiles, and others. And just last week, I heard that North Korea is sending self-propelled howitzers and rocket launchers as well. And earlier this year, June this year, Putin visited Pyongyang, and the two countries revived this Cold War era mutual defense treaty. And now, as you mentioned, North Korea is sending even troops to Russia, really rising as the biggest supporter of Russia's war efforts. So just a month ago, the Pentagon estimated that there were about 10,000 North Korean troops in Russia. They were deployed to the Kursk region in Russia that Ukraine seized earlier this year. But it seems like the number is growing. Now the Pentagon says that there are about 12,000 soldiers, and then they've been spotted in the Ukrainian territories in Mariupol and Kharkiv, marking an escalation. And as you mentioned briefly, it seems that some North Korean soldiers were attacked and killed. Some 500 North Korean soldiers and a military North Korean general, high-level general, were killed by Ukrainian attacks using Storm Shadows missiles, long-range artillery that the United Kingdom just authorized Ukraine to use within Russian territories. And so the situation is developing rapidly. And this is helping Russia's war efforts significantly. It seems that Russia is facing recruitment challenges, especially because over 1,000 Russian soldiers are killed daily on the battlefield, right? And that is putting a strain on the regime, and so Russia's troop deployment is helping significantly. And according to Zelensky, the number of Russian soldiers could increase up to 100,000. Of course, we don't know.
North Korean soldiers.
North Korean soldiers
up to 100,000.
up to 100,000, which is not very hard to believe because, again, if it is true that over 1,000 soldiers are killed every day, then this 12,000 soldiers are not going to last very long. And so this is helping Russia significantly and is making things complicated for Ukraine, especially because these two sides are trying to gain as much as possible before the war ends. And at a negotiating table, they want to be in a stronger position. In order to do that, they want to make as much progress as possible, but it is making difficult for Ukraine now.
I read your piece for USIP, which spoke about the issues we're speaking about today. And if I remember right, I mean, I think you said that soldiers are earning, North Korean soldiers are earning how much? 2,000
per
a month.
soldier per month. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you can do the math, but 2,000 times 10,000 is a tenth of what 2,000 times 100,000 would be. And so you could start seeing significant, growth in defense monies that they could receive, right? Go ahead.
So, if there are 12,000 people today, that means $24 million per month.
Yeah.
North Korea's GDP of 2023 was about $30 billion, which is, so the 24 million is like almost 1.1% of North Korea's GDP per year.
Yeah, and if they again expand that number significantly, that will bring about much more. So let's talk a little bit about Seoul's interests at stake. This actually seizes quite a bit of political thought and attention, and yet Europe's a long ways away from Seoul, and so you got to ask yourself, so what? What is it at the core of Seoul's interest that they are seized with this issue?
Yeah, so this development poses a significant threat to South Korea's national security for a number of reasons. One of them is the economic payment that Russia is making because some of the money will be used for enhancing North Korea's nuclear and missile capabilities, right? And also Russia is providing North Korea with oil far exceeding the annual cap of 500,000 barrels that the UN Security Council permits. And so that could also help North Korea's economy, which can also translate to its military capabilities. And for the first time since the Korean War ended in 1953, North Korea is acquiring combat experiences. North Korea has sent some small number of contingents to Vietnam and some other countries in the past, but this is really the first time that North Korea experiences this large-scale war, especially the modern warfare, witnessing the use of advanced weaponry like drones. And so those North Korean soldiers who survive and go back to North Korea could contribute to North Korea's modern warfare preparations. And also this serves as a great opportunity for North Korea to test its weapons. We know that some of the weapons that North Korea provided to Russia didn't really work properly, and this is a great opportunity for North Korea to test and monitor those weapons, what works, what doesn't work, and etc. But the biggest concern for South Korea really is the possibility that North Korea will acquire sensitive military technologies that could really affect the military balance on the Korean Peninsula. So you mentioned some of those technologies like the nuclear power submarine technologies that could enhance North Korea's second strike capability, and re-entry vehicle technology that would enhance North Korea's missile capabilities, this high resolution lens for spy satellites that would enhance North Korea's ISR intelligence surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities, and many others, advanced aircrafts and etc. And so, this is a big concern for South Korea.
Okay, so you spoke, as I understood the things you were stating there, is principally Seoul sees through the interest of the enemy, North Korea, becoming more combat capable. Okay, so let me ask you this then. If that's what they're worried about, them becoming more combat capable through obtaining, increasing their defense budget, gaining combat experience, being more knowledgeable about using modern technologies on the battlefield, if that's what they're worried about, what are their objectives to try to do something about it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me about
Go ahead.
Seoul. But let me just also add another important reason why South Korea is very concerned about it, which is that this would make the United States think twice about defending South. So this re-entry vehicle technology and nuclear power submarines. I mean, we don't want to go into technical details, deep into technical details. However, these technologies would make it costly for the United States to come to the aid of South Korea if North Korea attacks South Korea, because I mean these capabilities would enhance North Korea's nuclear deterrent vis-a-vis the United States, and so that is another really big concern for South Korea. And to answer your question, what is South Korea doing then? How is South Korea responding? Well, understandably, President Yoon Suk-yeol of South Korea condemned this new development, North Korea's decision to deploy troops to Russia, and also vowed to take countermeasures, including directly providing weapons to Ukraine. So South Korea so far has provided humanitarian assistance and financial assistance to Ukraine, and indirectly supplied Ukraine with ammunition through the United States. But South Korea's domestic law prohibits South Korea from directly supplying weapons to those countries that are in armed conflict, and so South Korea has refrained from doing that. But President Yoon Suk-yeol said that he could reverse that policy to directly help Ukraine with supplying weapons. So
let me hold you there for a second. Let me ask you. I don't know that. So law prohibits him from being able to do that, and I just wonder if he actually has the support of the opposition party, which is in control of the National Assembly, to be able to alter those laws. And so he may want to do that, but does he have the support of the legislature to be able to back him up on that?
No, he doesn't. Especially this opposition-controlled National Assembly is adamantly against this move, and the public doesn't support it either. According to a recent poll, only 13% of the South Korean public people support supplying arms to Ukraine. And as you know, President Yoon Suk-yeol is not very popular these days.
I don't know. It's under 20%, 19, 18. It's a low percentage of popular support for what he's doing.
Right. So he doesn't have the support
No.
that he needs to do that.
So let's pull a little bit more on some of those things you brought out. And maybe let me even interject a thing. So I've heard that President Yoon has said things like, we will calculate our response based on what Pyongyang is doing. What they choose to do, then we'll respond to it. And I've thought about this, and I thought, that sounds rather reactive. It's as if though, don't make me do it. And so it doesn't feel as if though that is a policy driven by one's own interests, their own objectives, things they're trying to achieve, unless it is that it's just merely that maybe they do have things they want to achieve and they're just using it as a foil to be able to press the things that they otherwise couldn't do without a North Korea performing in this way. How do you see it? Is it reactive, or or are they using North Korea as a foil, or maybe there's something else even?
So I was actually pretty puzzled by that too, because when President said that we could make reactions based on North Korea's involvement in the war, and so that puzzled me, because then what is South Korea trying to achieve here? Because is it really trying to deter North Korea from doing something, but doing what really? Like withdrawing troops from Russia, or like preventing North Korea from deploying further troops? But then what sort of leverage does South Korea have over North Korea? And so and I think that while South Korea is deliberating its reactions and its policy, I think that there are a lot of things, that ambiguities that South Korea will have to clarify. And my suggestion is that, well, I think because the biggest concern for South Korea is, Russia's potential sharing, of these technologies to to North Korea. South Korea should try to focus on that. Try to focus on, deterring Russia from sharing those sensitive technologies that could really directly pose an existential threat to South Korea.
So that's exactly where I wanted to go next. And so when you said that they're worried about combat capability and operational capacity on North Korea's side is improving, providing more weapons doesn't actually get after keeping that from occurring, right? And so then I'm wondering, so what can they do? So you said, and you rightly noted, maybe that's the thing they ought to focus on, is keeping this technology transfer from occurring. Do they actually have levers to be able to control that, or not?
Yeah, I think that actually South Korea has some leverage.
Talk a little bit about that then.
Over Russia, not over North Korea, but over Russia, because South Korea has robust defense industrial base that can make things very complicated for Russia, or it can really hurt Russia's war efforts, because South Korea now, as I mentioned earlier, South Korea is refraining from supplying arms to Ukraine, but it has the capability to produce a large amount of weapons quickly, and South Korea can threaten to do that, help Ukraine directly or indirectly to make it more costly for Russia to sustain this war. So, but I think that South Korea should do this more gradually, incrementally. So the first step should be to set the red line very clearly. So this is the red line, don't cross that. And if you do cross that, then there will be consequences. The consequences will include, first of all, initially providing still non-lethal, but strategically important equipment such as sensors, cameras, or communication equipment that would help Ukraine collect and transmit data, which is basically to enhance Ukraine's surveillance and intelligence capabilities. And if Russia fails to comply with South Korea's demand to pledge not to supply this sensitive technologies to North Korea, then South Korea can go one step further by indirectly supplying defensive weapons, for example, air defense missile systems that Ukraine desperately needs these days, through the United States, the UK, or Poland, or some other countries.
Let's pull apart that a little bit, and let's check a couple things. I wonder, would Seoul be willing to give all that weapon for free?
Well, yeah, so that depends on how Russia responds, right?
And so the reason I ask is, so Ukraine's defense spending is probably about 30-something% of its budget right now. So it's pretty significant. Nobody spends that amount of money on defense, right? That percentage. And it is, if you listen to current or future U.S. Posturing on where it may be with Ukraine, it feels as if though it may have less involvement next year than it has had recently. And the U.S. has provided significant amount of defense articles to Ukraine. And while Europe has provided significant assistance, less of it has been in defense articles and more of it has been in other types of assistance. And so I've thought to myself, well, I wonder who's there to pay the bill for Seoul to follow through with that and advance, transfer significant numbers of, quantities of defense articles to Ukraine as a countermeasure to all of this. And so that's kind of
So when we provide those weapons, I mean, when we're talking about like South Korea providing those weapons indirectly, it is to help these other countries, Ukraine's arms suppliers, backfill their stockpile, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and so that is not going to be free, right? But of course, if South Korea believes that this is a direct threat to South Korea's national security, then South Korea could, of course, the National Assembly, which deals with budget, will have to agree to this, but that they can talk about like spending a portion of their defense budget to help Ukraine if it is directly related to South Korea's national security.
Right. So this becomes like a proxy war. Maybe not with on Seoul's part with soldiers like it is in North Korea's, but it clearly becomes that way with its weapons, with the equipment it is sending. And I think you could argue the United States in that regard, providing the defense weapons, is in fact fighting a bit of a proxy war where it's not sending its soldiers per se, but it is doing this. And so wouldn't that be interesting in some regards, having North Korea with combat forces fighting and South Korea with weaponry? That's proxy.
So there is a concern that if North Korean soldiers are killed by South Korean weapons, what is that going to, cause to? How is that going to affect the inter-Korean relations? That is a concern. But North Korean soldiers are fighting in Russian uniform, and they are there. And then South Korea is helping, Ukraine, which is legitimate. And so, of course, there is a concern about things escalating on the Korean Peninsula because of this. So I think what President Yoon Suk-yeol mentioned earlier, about like his will to provide even weapons directly to Ukraine, I think that is very escalatory, and that is very risky. And then I don't think that South Korea should go there now. However, if Russia refuses to refrain from sending those sensitive sensitive military technology to North Korea, that could be a significant threat to South Korea, then South Korea will have to do something to prevent that from happening.
So let me pull you further on this, because this gets more difficult to process the deeper you go. So if it's in a proxy fight, if North Korea or South Korea suddenly feel like their security is more at risk, do they then take actions across the border? instead of just fighting it in Europe and Ukraine and Russia, does this lead to further conflict or to lead to conflict on the peninsula?
Yeah, I think that though still there is the risk of that happening is not too high, especially because when North Korea has sent a lot of its troops and weapons to Ukraine, to Russia, then that negatively affects their military readiness. And so at this point, I don't really think that North Korea will have a strong urge to attack South Korea. And of course, South Korea is. Because North Korea nuclear weapons, and North Korea has the capability to deter South Korea. Of course, there are small-scale skirmishes, so provocations can happen. But and there is always a concern, especially when these both Koreas are actually pretty hawkish toward each other. But I don't really think that there is a very strong possibility. But this is not a ideal situation. However, the situation is just not ideal. So we cannot help it. South Korea will have to react in certain ways.
Well, I tell you, I don't know. I have spent 40-something years in this area, and I don't know that this would have been on my bingo card that. The two Koreas would have been fighting a proxy fight in another country. We'll see where this goes. Let's pull on a different direction. Let's talk a little bit about an axis between the states of North Korea, Russia, and China. You began earlier in the conversation. You spoke about the strengthening of a relationship between North Korea and Russia, and it really has. It is this alliance has really been modernized. They had an alliance for a long time, but it never did they act upon the clause of coming to another's aid or something, and yet we're finding ourselves there at this time with actually, to your earlier point, maybe this will go to much higher. 100,000 people is significant. Investment in conflict on behalf of Russia. And then there's a talk of where China could come in on this as well. And so it forms a bit of this axis in the area. Maybe you might talk more about that. Where do you see this going? How would you portend the future in this?
Yeah, so of course China would deny that there is an axis emerging among the three countries. And this is why China was very uncomfortable and unhappy about this emerging strengthening ties between Russia and China, because it gives the perception that there is a emerging axis among these three countries, and it really incentivizes countries in the region, namely the United States, Japan, and South Korea, and to deepen their security cooperation. And also, it also gives the impression that the security of Asia and security of Europe cannot be separated anymore. These two theaters are increasingly converging, and so there is more incentive for countries in the region and European theater also to deepen their cooperation. So all of this is not really in the interest of China, because China wants to maintain good trade relationship with European countries, and China really doesn't want to be seen as part of this axis. However, well, it is hard to deny that there is. This is not really a formal alliance. There's definitely a marriage of convenience, but it is quite hard to deny that there is some sort of a strong alignment here among these three countries, because China and North Korea are treaty allies. They in 2021 they renewed their mutual defense treaty for 20 years. And North Korea and Russia are now treaty allies. And China has been helping Russia's war efforts, not by directly supplying weapons to Russia, but by providing dual-use items that could be used for military purposes. And allegedly, China has allowed Russia to establish defense industrial infrastructure in the Xinjiang province. And China has been very silent about this emerging partnership between North Korea and Russia, and has refused to do more to affect North Korea's decisions to deploy troops and help Russia. And so there is kind of an alliance, an alignment going on there, and whether China likes it or not.
Fair enough. I wonder if this actually has a potential of becoming more solidified than it is now. You know, something about living in the neighborhood. In South Korea, Seoul lives in this neighborhood. It can, whatever actions it takes against Moscow, Moscow's not, or at least Russia's not that far away from the peninsula, and so they have persistence. Same thing with Beijing, and so it must feel at times for Seoul that they're living in a tough neighborhood. And while they have positive or improving relations with Japan, historically that's not been the case either. And so then maybe I'll ask you about its relationship, its alliance with the United States, because that's where it draws its strength from, its ability to not feel as if it's constrained by the neighborhood it's living in. How does Seoul, what does it do to help strengthen this relationship, this alliance with the United States going forward?
Yeah, sure. I mean, South Korea-U.S. alliance is in a very good position today, and also, as you mentioned, that the trilateral cooperation has been going pretty well so far. But this recent development of this formation of an axis and the war in Ukraine, North Korea's participation in that war, all of these things make this partnership and alliance more important than ever before, right? But then this situation is unfolding when there's a political transition going on in the United States, and some are concerned about sort of a growing isolationism in the United States, and there are some uncertainties at this point. But I think that this alliance, U.S.-ROC alliance, is really important, not only for protecting South Korea, but also for the United States, especially in its efforts to counter China and maintain peace and security in the Indo-Pacific region. And so this is really not the time where when the two countries should really allow rifts to be formed, because this there is the other side is for tightening their cooperation, and then South Korea and the United States, and along with Japan, should collaborate to join their forces to counter this threat together. And the United States cannot do it alone. South Korea certainly cannot do it alone. But I am also particularly concerned about the future of trilateral cooperation, especially because even though it has been going pretty well, what has been really sort of holding it together has been, I think, the U.S.'s very strong, enthusiastic support for this, because there is lingering tension between the two countries over historical issues. Just last weekend, there was another concerning event that sort of renewed the bad feelings between the two countries. Occurred over this Sado gold mine issue. I don't know.
Tell more. I know about it, but I'm not so sure. So, what is Sado gold mine?
Yeah, so that's where some South Korean forced laborers their labor was exploited, and then when South Korea
during the Second World War
during
period.
the Second World War, and according to South Korea, Japan had agreed to acknowledge their exploitation of forced laborers during the war, and apologize for the families to the families of the victims during the memorial service, which was Sunday or a couple of days ago or yesterday. But it seems that Japan refused to do that. Japan sort of lamented that there were some people who suffered apologize. I don't know if Japan apologized, but just generally talked about some hardships that all workers went through, but didn't mention that South Korean workers were there by force. And so there is this issue that is just unfolding right now as we are speaking, and so South Korea boycotted the memorial service, and so I don't know. And then a lot of South Koreans are very upset about President Yoon not responding more forcefully to Japan, protesting to Japan. But this is just only the latest symptom of a very deeply rooted problem, which is the unresolved historical issues, and things will come up. So.
No, I think you're spot on, and I've said this the same, is that this relationship, a trilateral relationship, has to be cared for extremely closely because of the things you're speaking about. They're just below the surface, the various issues, and so it takes tending. I think maybe we'll go over to some audience questions. We have quite a few, and so let's go through those. The first one is asking about China's influence on Pyongyang, and so it asks this: how has China's reactions to North Korea's troop deployment to Russia shaped its influence on Pyongyang's decision making?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the short answer is that China really didn't have much leverage over North Korea, and
a lot of people think they do, though.
Right.
But yeah.
Right, but I think that its leverage has even been weakened.
Yeah.
A lot of think that China does have leverage because it does have tools to hurt North Korea badly, which could even lead to the end of the Kim regime. But for example, just last year in 2023, trade with China accounted for 98% of North Korea's trade.
That's right.
So, China has been providing North Korea with oil and natural gas. And so they say if China sets the mind to it, then China can make North Korea collapse, the regime collapse within days. However, these tools will be leveraged only if China can use it without hurting itself. But, China's main policy objectives when it comes to North Korea is to maintain stability.
That's right.
There, right? To prevent the North Korean regime from collapsing, so that there won't be this massive influx of refugees into the Chinese border, and this instability that would ensue would not be in the interest of China. And also, if Korea is unified under the South Korean leadership, which is not automatic, but there's a chance that could happen, then this unified Korea under the influence of the United States is not what China would welcome. And so, for that reason, China does have the tools, but wouldn't use the tools, and therefore it doesn't really have the leverage. And whenever Chinese people, government officials, are under pressure to do something to change North Korea's behavior, they say that they don't have leverage. And if anything, now that North Korea has another friend who can supply natural resources, oil, and economic aid, and even security guarantee, then China's leverage is even weaker than it was before.
No, you're right. 98% of trade is done with between China and North Korea. That's significant. It hasn't always been that way. In 2006, when North Korea conducted its first nuclear weapons test, before the series of sanctions, or like 11 sanctions that have been placed on them since then, it represented maybe 36% of trade between them. It has been one of the outcomes of the sanctions has reduced all the trading, external trading minus China, and so we've kind of created that, or the situation has been brought up as resulted in this type of dynamics where they have so much trade between the two. And while the relationship with Russia is clearly strengthening, and they're gaining more, perhaps hard currency and a lot of in-kind things that they need for their defense, it probably won't supplant the level of trade you're talking about with North Korea. but I can imagine that North Korea is quite pleased with this level of engagement with Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this next question asks about military readiness and strategic posture. Does North Korea's support for Russia in Ukraine affect its overall military readiness or strategic posture?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think I mentioned this briefly earlier, but
Yeah.
if North Korea sends more troops, especially up to 100,000 troops, that would negatively affect North Korea's military readiness in the short term. Also, a lot of weapons that North Korea is sending to Russia, that would also help undermine North Korea's military readiness. However, in the long term, I think this war experience would enhance North Korea's military readiness and preparations, especially because they, as I mentioned earlier, they have now this, combat experience, and also with potential supplies of weapon systems from Russia. Even if it is not very sensitive technologies, but Russia could help North Korea with some sort of military capabilities. So yeah, that would, in the long term, I think that could enhance North Korea's military readiness.
Yeah, I mean, just the inflow of defense dollars for it, and the defense industrial base in North Korea is massive. A couple hundred companies, a couple million employee workers that work in this, and you spoke about now transferring howitzers and things like that. The number of artillery rounds that are fired. I mean, it just wears out a cannon tube, and those have to be replaced. But those are tough. Most countries, to replace cannon tubes that quickly they're just not set up to do that.
Right.
I'm not so sure North Korea is. I think they're an exception in this case. They have a very mature defense industrial base that I think put people to work, and so this must be a bit of a boon for North Korea. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see whether it's going to be a positive or a net negative for them going forward.
Yeah. We'll have to see. But in the short term, I think that it will be negative, at least in the short term. And then that's why I thought, when earlier this year, Sig Hacker and Robert Carlin decided, they assessed that North Korea has already decided to invade South Korea. And I thought, probably this is not the time. I wasn't too worried.
Yeah, I would agree with you. They're quite engaged in something else right now. So conflict is probably not about to break out on the peninsula. Yeah. Let's ask, this next question is asking about the implications of fleet modernization. So here's the question. What are the implications of North Korea providing troops to Russia and receiving modernization assistance for its military from Russia and China? So what do you see?
Well, it's unlikely that North Korea will acquire any support from China, but I think that Russia could certainly help.
Yeah.
So North Korea's naval capabilities North Korea has a pretty large fleet, large navy. In terms of quantity, it has a lot of ships, more than South Korea, but in terms of quality, it's far inferior to South Korea. And so it has been trying to modernize its naval capabilities.
Kim Jong-un actually said that recently, that he was going to put a lot of focus on improving their fleet, right? I mean, this was a recent directive that he gave. Let's improve the fleet.
Right.
So continue.
Especially underwater capabilities like submarines, and especially North Korea has been interested in building nuclear power submarines because that would really enhance its second strike capability. Meaning, if the United States attacks North Korea and tries to neutralize its land-based, ground-based missiles and nuclear weapons, North Korea wants to ensure that it has some nuclear weapons and missiles left so that it can launch them from submarines against the United States. And so that would deter the United States from attacking North Korea in the first place. But making nuclear power submarines is not an easy task, especially making them quiet is not easy. It requires significant technology. And just making just small naval reactor is hard enough. But some of those countries that have nuclear power submarines, like India and China, India's submarines are very noisy. China is just starting to build some quiet nuclear power submarines. So that's not easy. However, with Russia's help, then North Korea will be able to to build nuclear power submarines that are quiet and that are not vulnerable to detection, which will really help its deterrent capabilities. And also, North Korea has made HALE its like underwater attack nuclear drone or nuclear torpedo. But it's not really clear how effective that will be. Some people call it, HALE means tsunami, but some people call it's more like a bubble jet than a radiological tsunami. But Russia has this nuclear torpedoes called Poseidon that's very, very effective. And so, I think that North Korea might be interested in acquiring that technology as well from Russia.
Oh, interesting, yeah. This next question is asking about strengthening NATO and EU's collaboration. So how can South Korea strengthen its collaboration with NATO or the European Union to address these shared security concerns?
Right. So South Korea is already maintaining very tight relationship with NATO and the EU. So South Korea is one of those 4 Indo-Pacific partners of NATO, along with Australia, New Zealand, and Japan. And South Korea has pretty strong economic relationship with the EU as well. And South Korea has been already cooperating with European countries in terms of counterterrorism, cyber security, non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, and etc. And recently, South Korean officials briefed NATO officials regarding North Korea's military capabilities, and in the wake of North Korea's decision to send troops to Russia. And so I think going forward, especially because this relationship between North Korea and Russia will continue to sustain, continue to remain strong, then South Korea and NATO can also do more intelligence sharing. With the EU, especially in sort of economic resilience and supply chain resilience, I think that South Korea can play an important role, especially when European countries are trying to win off of Russian oil and also China's supply chain and stuff like that. South Korea can help by, for example, providing nuclear power plants in Europe, and South Korea has strength in microchips and etc. Some critical elements for manufacturing and stuff. So I think that there are a lot of things that they can do together. And although Ukraine is not part of the EU or NATO, but South Korea can help Ukraine build, reconstruct after the war ends. South Korea has rebuilt itself from the ashes of war, and I think South Korea can also help Ukraine in that regard.
Yeah, no, I think that you're absolutely right. President Yoon has actually put quite a bit of effort, energy towards improving or developing a relationship with the EU and NATO, quite different than previous administrations, and is that right?
Oh yeah. I mean, yes. South Korea also is trying very hard to get into the European nuclear market, and is negotiating with the Czech Republic today, and some other countries as well. And also South Korea can continue to supply weapons to European countries after the war ends as well. These countries will continue to build their defense, which is in the interest of European countries and also in the interest of the United States as well. And I think that South Korea can fill that gap and provide more weapons to European countries.
I see. So this next question is asking about domestic fallout for North Korea. So what risk do North Korea troops' casualties or the war crimes in Ukraine pose for Pyongyang's domestic stability and its propaganda narratives?
Yeah. So the short answer is, it's really difficult to know, right?
It is, right?
Yeah. So I try to, listen to what North Korean defectors have to say, especially those people who have served in the military, and then they are really all over the place. Some say that North Korean soldiers are still loyal to the regime, and so in the situation, in their circumstances, living conditions in Russia are still better than their living conditions back in North Korea, and so, some people say that there is not going to be that much of an impact on the regime security. Others say that North Korean soldiers, they wouldn't understand why they have to fight against Ukrainians, with which they have nothing. They don't have anything against Ukrainians. Why do they have to fight for Russia and for the regime? And the $2,000 per month. I mean, North Korean soldiers and their families are, not going to see that money, and so there will be grievances. And especially because the North Korean regime hasn't really made an announcement about this troop deployment to Russia internally. So that makes me think that probably the regime is concerned about potential ramifications about this. Some people say that this is probably the single biggest mistake that Kim Jong-un has ever made. It's going to lead to the end of the regime. But of course, I mean, it's really difficult to know. I think it is possible that some North Korean family members, especially those who lost their sons, especially when the number of casualties mount, there could be their grievances could reach a critical mass that could lead to some sort of social unrest or even a social revolution. But I don't know if that's going to actually lead to the collapse of the regime, because that depends on a lot of other factors. For example, if the elite will stand by the side of the regime. But I don't really think that those elites will have to suffer from this. I don't think that their sons are going to Ukraine or Russia, right? If anything, they may benefit from the payment that Russia is making, to the regime. And so I don't know if they actually have the will to side with the people and overthrow the regime. And so, yeah, again, it is a long way of saying, who knows?
I wonder if it's wishful thinking. If I were to just go back in time, the U.S. Fighting in Vietnam, it called upon, it asked Seoul to provide combat forces to go fight in a land that perhaps South Koreans would have said, well, what are we sending, 2 divisions of combat forces to Vietnam to fight somebody who's not our enemy? What are we doing this for? And clearly people died and all those other things, and people might have asked the question, and we didn't have an end of a South Korean regime over that. I mean, there's some parallels. If I mean, at least it rhymes a little bit. What do you?
At least those people South Korean soldiers who fought in Vietnam got paid, right? They got paid, and also South Korea's economy developed, significantly with the economic assistance that.
But one would argue that may be the case in North Korea, that they may develop.
I don't think that money, whatever the money and oil, whatever that Russia pays to North Korea is gonna be shared by the people very much. So yeah. So
I'll date myself, but going on 45 years ago when I was in South Korea, you know how much soldiers made a month?
How much?
I don't know, 30,000 won, so about $30 a month. So they got paid, but not a lot. It's so I don't know. I try to hold things in relativity instead of seeing only good things happen to good people and only bad things happen to bad people. It seems I avoid that myself.
Oh yeah. That's a good point. But I think I heard that those soldiers who fought in Vietnam got paid significantly more for So I think that some people went there just for economic reasons.
Could be. I made $300 a month back then, so it wasn't significant. Okay, so let's go on to this other question from our audience. This one's on impact on regional relationships. How might Russia's closer ties with North Korea impact its relationship with other Indo-Pacific nations, such as Japan or even ASEAN or other places?
Yeah, so I don't really think that this recent development would affect Russia's relationship with Japan and ASEAN, because with Japan, Russia's relationship with Japan is already pretty bad because of Japan's decision to impose economic sanctions against Russia in the wake of the Ukraine war, and also more recently to provide the United States with missile defense systems so that it's basically indirectly helping Ukraine. And so Japan trade volume plummeted recently in the last 2 years. And so, of course, some of threats, that are opposed to South Korea. I mean, Japan is also concerned about all those ramifications like military technology sharing and economic assistance to North Korea and all that. But the relationship was already bad, and I don't think that it's going to get that much worse because of this development. With ASEAN, I think Russia's relationship with ASEAN countries, probably except for Singapore, has been okay. Although, except for Vietnam and Laos, all of these ASEAN countries voted to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine at the UN General Assembly. But still, Russia has not been isolated by ASEAN countries. Russia has been consistently been invited to ASEAN summits, East Asia summits. And recently, some ASEAN countries, especially those with large Muslim populations like Malaysia and Indonesia, were pretty disappointed by the United States' support for Israel. And so they have sort of tilted away from the United States and moved closer to Russia and China, which is illustrated by the fact that recently these 4 ASEAN countries, including Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand and Vietnam, become the partner countries of BRICS, helping Russia avoid diplomatic isolation. And and I don't think that. And then this recent development, the BRICS thing, happened even after Russia and North Korea started building their ties. And so I don't think that relationship is going to be affected that much either.
That's been a wonderful hour together talking about what's for me anyway, and I know you, quite a pressing and interesting topic. And so thank you for that. Before we let you go, I wonder if you might recommend a book for our audience.
Yeah. So the book that I would like to recommend is Dancing on Bones, History and Power in China, Russia, and North Korea, written by Katie Stellard, published by Oxford University Press in 2022. So this book doesn't really talk about the relationship between these countries, but it talks about how the leaders of these countries manipulate history to portray that they are the victims, they were the threatened ones by external actors, and in order to galvanize support for their authoritarian rules and aggression against foreign countries. I think this book helps us understand this pretty ironical phenomenon that Russia and North Korea agreed to come to each other's aid when they were invaded by foreign countries. When Russia is the one that invaded another country, North Korea is the one that is threatening to turn Seoul into the Sea of Fire, and how China is consistently just continuously talking about the century of humiliation and portray all these problems with China, from like Hong Kong protests and to the human rights criticism of China's human rights behaviors in Xinjiang as foreign conspiracies. So I think that this book is pretty eye-opening and definitely worth the read.
We will add that to our book list. Thank you for being here. I do hope that we have you back sooner than another year. We can't have 1 year be the interval between us sitting down. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As we conclude today's dialogue, it's clear that South Korea faces a complex and multifaceted challenge in responding to North Korea's troop deployment to Russia. Seoul must carefully navigate its relationship with allies and adversaries alike, while employing a range of diplomatic, economic, and military strategies to safeguard its interests and promote regional stability. These conversations shape security. Join us on December 2nd for Dialogue 33, Sustainability and Responsibility in Space. In that program, Dr. Namrata Goswami and Sam Wilson and Dr. Al Ohlers from the center here will explore sustainable space practices as we seek common ground for shared responsibility in space. From all of us at DKI APCSS, thank you for joining us for this important conversation. I'm James Minnich, and until we meet again, aloha away. As always, the opinions expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of DKI APCSS, the U.S. Department of Defense, or the U.S. government.